Welcome back to Echoing Truth. Today we're going to be continuing our discussion about Marxism. In our previous episode, we talked about the history of Marxism. We talked about Karl Marx and how the idea of Marxism came about and what its main ideas were. We also talked about how it changed and progressed throughout history and kind of led up to what it is today. Now, today, in our episode, we're going to be talking about Marxism and how it has crept into American society. Before we get into the episode, I'd like to address a few things about the previous episode about Marxism. There were a few comments that questioned my overall analysis and said that I was misrepresenting what Karl Marx had believed. Now, first off, everyone who disagreed with me, thank you for taking the time to actually watch the full episode and share your feedback and your opinions about the episode. So feel free to leave comments of agreement or disagreement. I'm going to speak the truth regardless of what anyone says. So yeah, feel free to share whatever opinion you have, and I will either comment on it on YouTube, or I will address it like this in the following episode. So just go ahead and share your feedback. Now, I think the overall complaint about the last episode was obviously against capitalism. And comments suggested that Karl Marx mainly wrote about the flaws of capitalism. And he did. He did indeed write about capitalism and the flaws of capitalism, like I said in my last episode. And capitalism does indeed have its flaws. But what I'm trying to get across is that all economic systems will have their issues. No system can ever be perfect because we live in a sinful world, where mankind is not inherently good, mankind is inherently evil. So there will always be someone that is seeking power over another. What I'm arguing is that socialism and all forms of socialism, communism, Marxism, they're all growing from the same tree. They're all branches of the same thing. But all branches of socialism are that is the worst possible system that there could be, because it takes power away from the average citizen. It takes power away from the people, and it puts that power in the hands of the state. Citizens lose their rights and freedoms, and the state decides everything for them. Now, I'm sure people are going to disagree with me, and you can disagree with me all you want, but just because you disagree doesn't make it not true. But you have to kind of agree with me on this one, because apparently in a communist society, the idea of rights is illogical and is just an old bourgeoisie idea that only exists in a class society. So agree or disagree with me, I win either way. Now, something else that is illogical in a communist society apparently is equality. Another commenter brought this up and suggested that I read more of Karl Marx's works because he thought I misrepresented what Karl Marx was saying when I had said that Karl Marx was fighting for equality. Now, I had already read much of Karl Marx's works, and those are hours of my life that I will never get back. But anyway, in the critique of the Goth program, Karl Marx does say that equality is basically a stupid idea and it is the wrong focus. Instead, he says that it is important to abolish the class system, and is in a society that is without the class system, equality wouldn't be an issue anymore. Now let's kind of think about that. The classes that Karl Marx was talking about were the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, the low-income laborers and the high-income owners. Now, in order to get rid of the class system, the wealth and the property of the bourgeoisie would need to be redistributed and given to the proletariat. Now, once that happens, everyone is on the same level, and there's no more class system. Kind of sounds like everything is evening out, making everything equal and the same across the board. It kind of sounds like equality, right? But it really isn't equality at all, because equality suggests fairness in treatment. But by taking wealth and resources from the wealthy, there is unfair treatment against them. So really, people that are for communism, they want equality for themselves. And they don't, and not for those who are more successful than them or have more than them. And all of this talk about abolishing the class system and overthrowing capitalism, it is all about taking from those who have more. As I said previously, and in the previous episode and in this episode, and probably in any episode following, this world is sinful and mankind is inherently evil. And because of that, people become jealous and they become envious. They want what other people have, and instead of working hard to earn what they want and what they desire, they rather just declare an injustice. There's an injustice and inequality. There's no balance, and they just claim it's the system's fault, and they try to take from those who have more instead of earning. Now, I'm not saying that the wealthy in this system, the capitalist system, are flawless, because they certainly are not. They can be greedy and they can be selfish. There is still sin on their side as well. My point is, we all have sin in our lives, and when we don't have much, we become jealous. But that does not give us any reason to say that there is an injustice and that we should take from the rich. And if you're wealthy, it doesn't mean that you can become selfish or greedy. You need to be using what God has given you. You need to be using your wealth for good. Now, I said this in a previous episode, but no government or economic system will be able to fix the sinful nature of mankind. Only God can change the heart of mankind. I'm very strongly against Karl Marx and his ideas. Not only because I think it is a system that encourages sin and it oppresses individuals, but I am against Marx's ideas because of his stance on God and religion. Karl Marx said this in the introduction of a contribution to the critique of Hegel's philosophy of right. He said this: "Religious suffering is, at one and the same time, the expression of real suffering and a protest against real suffering. Religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, and the soul of a soulless condition. It is the opium of the people." God and religion are not a distraction from the difficulties and troubles in the world. God is the solution to those problems. Okay, so that's my recap and response to those who had issues with my first episode on Marxism. And now I'm going to be talking about Marxism and how it has slowly crept into American society. Marxism, like I said in the last episode, was not a fully thought out idea, and it needed steps to take in order to bring about a communist society. And Antonio Gramsci and the Frankfurt School of Thought had been the architects that have turned Marx's ideas into what they have become today: cultural Marxism. Now, the main thing that Gramsci and the Frankfurt School had to address about Marxism is why the fall of capitalism never happened like Karl Marx had predicted. They argue that Karl Marx was wrong when he said that it was an economic issue, because it was also a cultural issue, and people were not only being oppressed by the economic system, but they were also being oppressed culturally. They argue that the wealthy controlled the thoughts of society, and that in order to bring about a communist society, they needed to first control the thoughts of society. Now, Gramsci said that the wealthy maintain the control through 6 civil society institutions, which I mentioned again in the last episode. They're the family, education, religion, media, trade unions, and pop culture. In order to change the thoughts of society, the Marxist movement needed to take control of the institutions. And over time, they slowly have. If you have been paying any attention to the news and politics over the past 20 plus years, you will have noticed that the way people think about the institutions has drastically changed. The family has been broken apart. People now believe that marriage can be between two men or it can be between two women. The rights of parents has been taken away. Now, the parents don't have a right to decide what their child does and does not do. It's now up to the child, regardless of what their age is. They could be a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old, they could decide whatever they want, and the parents may not have a say in it because the child, who is still growing and developing, is able to make their own decisions, and they can choose to be whatever gender they want to be now, apparently, according to society. And the purpose of all of this and breaking apart the family and distorting it into something that it's not, the purpose of this is to help, try to cause people to break free from the oppressive mold that the wealthy are using to oppress them. And if they can break free from this mold, they can see the real issues in the economic system. So that's the overall goals in distorting and destroying these civil societies, and the family being one of the main targets and one of the ones that's been most distorted. Then there's the education system. The education system controls what kids are taught. Now, the Bible has been taken out of schools, and history is being rewritten. And Karl Marx did understand how history and education impacted how people think. He said this: if you can cut the people off from their history, then they can be easily persuaded. So what he's saying there is, if you rewrite history, if you aren't telling the full truth of history, and people don't know what actually happened, then you can feed them whatever information you want. You can rewrite history. You can persuade them to believe anything. And honestly, I've seen that a lot in the school system. I mean, evolution, boom, like that. Everyone started believing it just like that, just because this public school systems taught it. And obviously, I believe God and His Word are true. And I believe that God created the universe. God created mankind. God created the animals. He created mammals. He created sea creatures. He created the earth, the sky, the stars. He created everything. And I believe that. And that's what society used to believe and widely accepted until all of a sudden, we're going to accept the Big Bang Theory. Everything came from nothing. And that's just because it was taught in the school system. And everything is just being run through the school system. If you control the school system, you control the minds of society. And Karl Marx understood that, and his followers understood that this was key to persuading society to uprise against the system. Now, religion as well has also been under attack a lot, and Christians are being viewed as a danger to society. If you want to focus on religion and how that's being affected today, go ahead and listen to my previous episode about Christian nationalism. Now, people today aren't as religious as they used to be, and key biblical principles are not held anymore. Gay marriage, abortion, the LGBTQ community, and many other sinful things are now tolerated within the church. The church has gotten to this point because pastors are afraid to speak the truth for fear of persecution, for fear of losing the church's tax exemption. They feel a pressure on them to be accepting of this and only teach certain things. And what the church teaches is being controlled and monitored widely. There are very few actually genuine churches that are preaching the truth, that are not afraid to stand up for the truth of God's word and fight back against the cultural shift that has been taking place in America. But those churches are very few, and they are dropping like flies. There are very few pastors left that want to actually share the truth. And it is a sad reality that we face today in America. Now, the next civil society is the media, and don't get me started on the media. The media spouts off lies constantly and claim that what they say is the only real truth. And the idea of truth itself has been distorted. And truth can be whatever you want it to be. But nobody trusts media anymore. And at this point, most people that don't trust the media anymore, they've turned to podcasters. They've turned to people that are apart from the mainstream media and are just wanting to share truth. They listen to podcasters instead, and that's kind of the main driver of the shift to podcasts and people listening to podcasts. And that's kind of encouraging for me, because you kind of see that maybe people aren't completely on board with this social shift that the Marxist movement is trying to push forward, and that maybe there are people that still value truth and value God and His Word and what is actually true about in this world. So that's encouraging to me. So all these shifts in the civil societies are all ways that the Marxist movement is continuing to live on. It is a long, drawn-out strategy to change the social opinions in order to bring about an economic shift. And this plan was written about by Antonio Gramsci, and he was the main strategist behind this. And I mentioned this in the previous episode as well. He came up with the war of maneuver and the war of position, and they were battle plans. They were strategies for how to bring about a communist society. And I'm going to go ahead and explain what these are, like I did in the last episode. But the war of maneuver was a frontal assault. It's a rapid seizing of power from the state. And Gramsci believed that this was the best strategy if the state was weak and civil society was underdeveloped. And then the war of position strategy, however, was a trench battle. This strategy was for societies with a strong and complex civil society. So this would be like America. America has a in-depth and complex civil society, like we just talked about. This war of position, it required a prolonged and gradual struggle. And this involves building a counter-hegemony by challenging the dominant ideology in various institutions of civil society, like we just talked about. Fighting back against the main thoughts of these civil societies, like the family, marriage between man and woman. They needed to come against that and say it's something else. And same with the education and all these other various civil institutions. They needed to create a counter-hegemony to fight back against the dominant ideology at the time. And by winning the consent of the masses and forming alliances and forming agreement against the main ideas and ideology, this war of position would prepare the ground for a future war of maneuver. It's the stepping stone to kind of break apart civil society first and make it weak and now able to make a rapid seizing of this power, control of the state. Once you break down society and the thoughts and ideas of society, it becomes weak, and there is now the opportunity to now do the war of maneuver, which would be the rapid seizing of power from the state. Now the Marxist movement is currently in the trenches. And that's kind of obvious after we've looked at what is going on in society and then explained Gramsci's strategy. But they are not rapidly seizing power. They are in the trenches, and they're carrying out the war of position in hopes that they will be able to lay the groundwork for a future seizing of power of the current state. And once that happens, a new communist state would be put in place and to begin to carry out Marx's dreams. These Marxist movements within the culture are not just changing the thoughts within civil society, but they're actually causing change within the current state as well. To a point that if a seizing of power ever actually does happen and the communist state does actually take over, many of Karl Marx's tenets would already be somewhat in place. And I'm going to go ahead and explain what I mean by that. Karl Marx's ideas can be broken down into a couple key points. The first one is the abolition of property in land and application of all rents of land to public purposes. Now, in a communist society, all land would belong to the state. But currently, individuals in America own land, at least to some extent. But even though we own the land, we are limited on what we are allowed to do with that land. We need permission from the government to build on our land. We need permission to own chickens or other farm animals. We have to pay taxes to the government on land that we own. And if we fail to comply, we will be fined by the government or possibly removed from our land. We have a deed for our land, but do we actually own that land if we are restricted in all these areas and taxed and will be fined or removed if we do not pay our taxes on our land or follow their rules? And then there is also eminent domain, where the government can just go ahead and take your land for a public use or public benefit. So, like I said, do we actually own our land? And I know with this eminent domain, I know multiple people that have actually lost their houses because of this. There was a highway expansion. The government wanted to make the highway a 4-lane instead of a 2-lane. And well, guess what? Your house is too close to the road. We actually need it. So boom, they took their property, and here's compensation. It's not anything fancy. They just tell them, here's your compensation. You just have to accept it. That's just how it is. So, do we actually own our land, or do we have the illusion of owning our land? And another point is a heavy progression or graduated income tax. So basically, the more you make, the more you pay into the government. And this is a Marxist idea, and very clearly, we see this being carried out in America, in our society today. Now, the top 20% of earners, guess what? They pay over 80% of the income tax in America. 80%. 20% pay 80%. And that's crazy. If we're talking about fairness and equality, that's not fair and equal. That's targeting specific individuals just because they are more successful. And that is a Marxist idea that is very clearly in our society today. Then we've got the abolition of rights of inheritance. The state taxes you first on your income, like we just talked about, and they tax you when you purchase something, and they also tax you when you die. So after all that, when you die, they're still taxing you. And almost half of your wealth will be taken by the government when you die. But hey, at least your family gets to inherit at least some of it. Not all of it, but they get to at least inherit some of it. So unlike the Marxist idea where there would be no right of inheritance and the state would just take everything, hey, you get to at least take 50%, 60%, maybe. So somewhat positive, I guess. And then after that, we've got the centralization of credit, centralization of communication and transportation, all in the hands of the state. Then we've got the factories and instruments of production, all owned by the state. So all manufacturers, all factories are owned by the state. So they control all means of production in America. And then we've got the gradual abolition of the distinction between town and country by more equal distribution of people over the country. So spreading people out and kind of taking them and plopping them in the middle of nowhere and saying, you're going to live here now. So not having specifically cities and country, but having people equally distributed across the country. And then the biggest one out of all of them is free education for all children in public schools. And this is already implemented in society. And by giving this free education, the state is in control of the minds of the future and can control what children think. And we said this before, but by offering free education, you're kind of enticing parents like, here you go, you got free education. You don't have to pay for a private school. You don't have to do all the work of homeschooling. Here, you can send your kids off to free education. So by offering this and having kids be under this free government education, the state is in control of the minds of the future, and they control what the children think. And this is why there is so much pushback against school choice and homeschooling. Because if children are not going to these free public schools, these free government-run institutions, their minds cannot be controlled by the state. All of these things that are going on in America today, they should alarm us. And the unfortunate thing is, a lot of people just go about their day and just gradually watch as society changes and their rights and freedoms get taken away, and the Marxist movement just keeps pushing forward. And a lot of people are just oblivious to this. And if things continue on as they have been, we will be living in a communist society within the next 20 years. Like I said already in the previous episode, Marxism is not dead. It has lived on, and it is very active in America today. And people need to recognize what is going on in society, and they need to stand up for truth and not give in to this woke ideology that is determined to push forward the communist agenda. Now, part of me wishes that communism would take place in America, just so all of those people who supported Marx and his ideas can finally see that there is no freedom and there is no equality in a communist state. Everything, and I mean everything, is controlled by the state. And you are just a pawn in the eyes of the state. You're nothing. You're a drone. You're a body that can do what the government says. And that is not freedom, and that is not any way to live. So part of me wishes that it would take place, but obviously I do not want communism to take place. But, just so people can actually see what it's like, maybe I want it, but no. How about this? Just go to a communist state right now. Go to Venezuela, okay? If you want to find out what it's actually like, go there. Find out how magnificent it is. Now, like I said before, to all of you who support Marx, just feel free to go ahead, leave a comment, debate me. I'm happy to debate you and have a discussion about this. I'll either comment on YouTube, respond to your comment, or I'll address it like I did in this episode here. And to all of you that do see the truth and see the danger of a communist society, keep having faith. At the end of the day, the Lord is king, and he is in control of all things. Continue to have faith, pray, and share the truth with those around you. Thanks for listening to Echoing Truth. God bless. If you like this episode, please like and subscribe, and also please share with a friend. I'm on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. I'm also on Instagram and TikTok. See you next time.